A moldy sandwich was deposited with blatant disrespect onto Marcus Reynolds' first-class tray as Claire Wilson's lips twisted into a smug grimace. The eminent CEO observed her performance with measured composure, his finger discreetly activating the airline's surveillance system, a system he had commissioned as a part owner of Elite Airways. Behind the galley curtain, Claire's hushed insults, suggesting these individuals were out of place in first class, were perfectly captured. Each word sealed her fate, while Marcus meticulously documented the mistreatment with patient precision. His calculated silence as he pressed the call button once more carried more weight than any outburst could. It wasn't anger, but a quiet resolve that would transmute this ordinary flight into the most catastrophic misjudgment of Claire's professional life. Before we proceed further, please share your global location in the comments below and remember to subscribe. Marcus Reynolds smoothed his custom-tailored suit jacket as he settled into Seat 2, Alpha on Elite Airways Flight 347 bound for San Francisco. The plush leather first-class seat enveloped him with the familiar comfort he had come to expect from his frequent journeys, a small indulgence he allowed himself after 2 decades of meticulously building Reynolds Technologies from its inception. As fellow passengers embarked, Marcus retrieved his tablet and opened an email containing the quarterly performance reports for Elite Airways, the airline he partly owned through a discreet investment partnership established 3 years prior. "Good afternoon," a flight attendant greeted the silver-haired gentleman seated across the aisle, her voice warm and welcoming. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Whitman. May I offer you a glass of our signature champagne before takeoff?" Marcus observed the exchange peripherally, continuing to review the impressive revenue figures on his screen. Elite Airways had experienced a 15% surge in its premium travel segment under his strategic direction, though few employees were privy to his involvement beyond the boardroom. He preferred it that way, experiencing the airline as any ordinary patron would, gathering insights that quarterly reports and customer surveys could never truly convey. The flight attendant, identified by her name tag as Claire, moved efficiently through the cabin, distributing hot towels and champagne flutes to passengers in the forward rows. Marcus noticed her warm smile falter slightly as she approached his seat, her gaze briefly flicking to his dark complexion before settling somewhere above his shoulder. "Towel?" she inquired, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been moments before with the other travelers. "Yes, thank you," Marcus replied with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to such subtle shifts in treatment. He accepted the towel with a polite nod, observing Claire as she moved to the passenger seated behind him, her voice immediately brightening as she offered champagne and a cordial welcome. Marcus redirected his attention to his tablet, swiping to examine the customer satisfaction metrics he had personally championed as critical indicators of the airline's performance. The irony was not lost on him as he awaited his pre-departure beverage, the one he had specifically requested when booking his ticket. 10 minutes elapsed, precisely as always. The remaining first-class passengers received their drinks, including a middle-aged couple who had boarded after Marcus and were now sipping from crystal flutes filled with effervescent champagne. Marcus closed his tablet and activated the call button, his finger pausing momentarily as he contemplated whether this minor conflict was worth engaging. With a silent exhalation, he pressed it firmly. Claire reappeared, her expression taut. "Yes, sir. I believe I'm still awaiting my pre-departure beverage," Marcus stated, his voice measured and professional. "I pre-ordered the Malin 18 when I booked my ticket." "Oh," Claire responded, her eyes darting towards the galley. "I'm not seeing that in our system. We're actually running low on premium beverages for this flight. I can offer you orange juice or water if you'd prefer." Marcus glanced past her shoulder, noting the fully stocked bar cart being readied for service. "That's unusual. I received a confirmation email specifically detailing my beverage preference." He pulled up the email on his tablet and presented it to Claire. "Perhaps you could double-check." "Sir, as I mentioned, we have limited stock today," Claire replied, her tone growing increasingly dismissive. "The system sometimes overbooks certain items. I'll bring you some orange juice." Before Marcus could respond, Claire had already turned away, leaving him to watch as she whispered something to another flight attendant who glanced in his direction with a barely concealed smirk. Marcus took a deep breath and returned to his tablet, opening the communication application he used to stay in touch with his executive assistant, Jessica. He typed a brief message. Experiencing some interesting service discrepancies on Elite Flight 347. Might be nothing, but make a note to discuss with Diane in HR when I return. The captain's voice resonated over the intercom, announcing their imminent departure and expressing gratitude to passengers for selecting Elite Airways. Marcus returned his seat to the upright position and stowed his tablet, observing as Claire distributed warm, mixed nuts to the passengers around him. When she reached his row, she placed a small packet of pretzels on his tray table, the kind typically served in economy class, before continuing her rounds. Marcus examined the sealed package with a detached objectivity that belied the slow burn of realization forming in his gut. This was not simply poor service or an oversight. The pattern was becoming undeniably clear. As the aircraft began to taxi towards the runway, Marcus reopened his messaging application and sent Jessica another text. On second thought, please contact Diane immediately. I want to know if there have been any other service complaints filed by minority passengers in first class over the past quarter. And remind me, when did we install the cabin surveillance system in the premium cabins? The response arrived promptly. System went live 3 months ago across the entire fleet. All footage stored for 30 days. Should I be concerned? Marcus watched as Claire and another flight attendant disappeared behind the galley curtain, their hushed laughter drifting back into the cabin. Not yet, he typed, but stay close to your phone. I may need you to make some calls before we land. The aircraft accelerated down the runway, and Marcus felt the familiar pressure against his chest as they ascended into the clouds. What should have been the commencement of a tranquil 6-hour journey was rapidly transforming into something entirely different, a test of patience, professionalism, and principles that would carry repercussions far beyond this flight from New York to San Francisco. The seatbelt sign dimmed with a soft chime as the aircraft reached cruising altitude, signaling the cabin crew to commence their service preparations. Marcus Reynolds closed his eyes briefly, recalling the board meeting just 3 years prior when he had proposed a significant investment in Elite Airways. His fellow board members at Reynolds Technologies had questioned the wisdom of diversifying into air travel. However, Marcus had perceived an opportunity to revitalize an industry plagued by declining service standards and mounting customer dissatisfaction. The silent partnership had been a strategic maneuver, allowing him to observe operations objectively while implementing improvements from within the boardroom. Jessica's response illuminated his tablet screen. HR records show 17 formal complaints from minority passengers in first class over the past year, 5 specifically mentioning flight attendant Claire Wilson. 3 were dismissed for insufficient evidence, and 2 resulted in customer vouchers but no disciplinary action. Surveillance system is fully operational on your aircraft. Diane is standing by for your call. Marcus acknowledged the message with a quick tap, a familiar weight settling across his shoulders. The burden of proof, he mused, always seemed heavier for some than for others. He tucked the tablet into his jacket pocket as Claire approached with the meal cart, her practiced smile reappearing as she served the passenger across the aisle. Mr. Whitman, we have your special order ready. The seared salmon with truffle risotto and a glass of the Montrachet you requested. Chef's compliments, she stated, carefully arranging the white china plate before the silver-haired gentleman. The aroma of the gourmet meal wafted through the cabin as Claire continued serving each passenger with attentive care. Marcus observed the ritual, noting how she leaned in to explain the wine pairing to a young couple, how she recalled another passenger's preference for extra bread. When she finally reached his seat, Claire's demeanor subtly shifted as she placed a covered plate before him without meeting his eyes. "Your meal," she announced flatly, already turning away. Marcus lifted the dome to discover a dry sandwich on visibly stale bread, accompanied by a small cup of lukewarm apple juice. The stark contrast between his meal and those being served to others was pronounced enough to elicit curious glances from nearby passengers. "Excuse me," Marcus called, his voice calm but firm enough to halt Claire's departure. "I believe there's been a mistake with my meal. I pre-ordered the chef's special when I booked this flight." Claire turned back, her expression carefully neutral. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have any record of that order. We're serving what's available." "That's interesting," Marcus replied, retrieving his phone to display his confirmation email. "Because I have the confirmation right here, along with your system's acknowledgement of my dietary preferences and meal selection." Claire barely glanced at the screen. "As I explained earlier about your beverage, our system sometimes overbooks certain items. There simply isn't enough of the premium meal service to go around today." A passenger seated across the aisle, Whitman, looked up from his salmon, fork suspended mid-air, as he followed the exchange with thinly veiled interest. Marcus noticed, but maintained his focus on Claire. "I see plenty of premium meals being served," he observed, gesturing discreetly to the surrounding passengers. "Perhaps you could explain why I'm the only one in first class receiving what appears to be an economy meal." Claire's smile tightened. "Sir, we have to prioritize certain guests based on status and loyalty program standing. I assure you, this is standard procedure." "I'm a Platinum Elite member," Marcus stated evenly. "I've flown over 200,000 miles with this airline in the past year alone." "I'll check with my supervisor," Claire replied, her tone making it evident she had no intention of doing so. She disappeared behind the galley curtain, leaving Marcus with the unappetizing meal before him. Marcus sat motionless for a moment, considering his options. 20 years of navigating corporate America as a black executive had taught him the value of choosing his battles wisely. This particular conflict, he decided, was worth pursuing, not merely for himself, but for the 17 others who had lodged complaints, and likely dozens more who had simply accepted the treatment as an unavoidable reality of their existence. He pressed the call button again, waiting patiently as minutes ticked by without a response. Finally, a different flight attendant approached, a younger man whose name tag read, "Michael." "Can I help you?" Michael asked, his tone suggesting that helping was the last thing on his mind. "Yes," Marcus responded, maintaining his professional demeanor. "I'd like to speak with the purser or chief flight attendant about an issue with my meal service." Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. "Claire is handling this section. What seems to be the problem?" "I pre-ordered a meal that wasn't delivered, and I've been given what appears to be an economy class option instead," Marcus explained, aware that several passengers were now openly observing the interaction. "When I inquired about it, I was told that certain passengers were being prioritized over others, despite my Platinum Elite status." "Sir, sometimes we have to make service adjustments mid-flight," Michael stated, his voice adopting a patronizing edge. "I'm sure Claire explained this to you. We simply can't accommodate every special request." Marcus nodded slowly, taking note of Michael's badge number as he spoke. "I understand service adjustments. What I don't understand is why everyone around me received the premium meal they ordered while I received this." He lifted the sandwich, which had begun to curl at the edges as it dried out. "Perhaps you could explain the criteria being used for these adjustments?" Michael's posture stiffened. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. You're disturbing other passengers." Marcus hadn't raised his voice at all, and he was keenly aware that the only disturbance was the one being created by the increasingly obvious disparity in service. A quiet tension settled over the first-class cabin as passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, some pointedly returning to their meals while others continued to observe with unmasked curiosity. "I haven't raised my voice," Marcus stated calmly. "I am simply asking for an explanation for the discrepancy in service." Behind Michael, Claire reappeared, whispering something to her colleague before both of them retreated to the galley. Through the partially open curtain, Marcus caught a glimpse of them huddled with a third crew member, all three occasionally glancing in his direction. Marcus reached for his phone again, opening his email to find the direct contact information for Diane Chen, the head of HR at Elite Airways. As he composed a message detailing the ongoing situation, he became aware of a presence beside his seat. Looking up, he found the silver-haired Mr. Whitman standing there, holding his half-finished plate of salmon. "Couldn't help but overhear," Whitman said, his voice lowered. "Been flying this route for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. It's not right." He paused, seemingly weighing his next words carefully. "Want me to say something?" Marcus appreciated the gesture, but shook his head slightly. "Thank you, but I can handle this." He returned his attention to his phone, adding another paragraph to his email as the crew members continued their whispered conversation behind the curtain, unaware of the silent documentation taking place or the storm gathering on the digital horizon. Marcus set his phone down and cautiously examined the sandwich before him. The bread's edges had an unmistakable greenish tint that grew more pronounced as he gently lifted the top slice. Dark spots of mold peppered the underside, confirming what his instincts had already told him. This wasn't merely poor service, but something deliberately malicious. He carefully replaced the bread and pushed the plate away, his appetite thoroughly extinguished by the discovery. "Everything all right with your meal, sir?" It was Michael again, his voice carrying a hint of mockery that wasn't lost on the passengers within earshot. "No, it's not," Marcus replied evenly, gesturing toward the sandwich. "There's visible mold on this bread. I'd like to speak with the captain about this situation." Michael leaned closer, examining the sandwich with exaggerated scrutiny. "I don't see anything unusual. Perhaps you're mistaken." "I assure you I'm not," Marcus stated, maintaining his composure despite the escalating provocation. "This bread is clearly spoiled, and I'd like to know why I was served it when everyone else received fresh, high-quality meals." Claire appeared beside Michael, her face flushed with what appeared to be irritation rather than embarrassment. "Is there a problem here again?" "Yes, there is," Marcus responded, directing his attention to Claire. "I've been served moldy bread while everyone around me enjoys their premium meals. I've asked repeatedly for an explanation, and so far all I've received are excuses and dismissals." Claire's eyes narrowed, a flash of something darker than mere annoyance crossing her features. "Sir, if you don't like what we've served, you're welcome not to eat it. But I will not have you disrupting this flight with baseless accusations." "Baseless?" Marcus echoed, his voice remaining measured despite the blatant gaslighting. "The evidence is right here." He gestured toward the sandwich. "I'd like to know why I'm receiving this treatment when I've been nothing but polite in my requests." "Maybe because some people don't know how to be grateful for what they're given," Claire muttered, just loud enough for Marcus and several nearby passengers to hear, "always wanting special treatment." The comment hung in the air, its implications unmistakable. An uncomfortable silence descended over the first-class cabin as passengers shifted in their seats, some pretending not to hear, while others exchanged knowing glances. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but years of navigating similar situations had taught him that losing composure would only reinforce the stereotypes people like Claire clearly held. "I don't want special treatment," Marcus clarified, his voice firm but still controlled. "I simply want equal treatment, the same meal options, the same service, and the same respect afforded to every other passenger who paid for a first-class ticket." Claire's demeanor shifted, her professional mask slipping further as she leaned closer to Marcus, lowering her voice. "Listen, I don't know how you got into this cabin, but we both know you don't belong here, so why don't you just sit quietly and be thankful you're not back in economy where—" "Claire," Michael interrupted, suddenly aware that several passengers had angled their phones in their direction. "That's enough. Let's discuss this in the galley." As the two flight attendants retreated behind the curtain, Marcus exhaled slowly, processing what had just occurred. The woman's prejudice had finally surfaced, explicitly confirming what her actions had already suggested. Marcus reached for his phone again, this time opening the Elite Airways Executive app, a secure platform accessible only to senior management and major stakeholders. With a few taps, he accessed the live feed from the cabin surveillance system, confirming that cameras were indeed recording. Behind the galley curtain, raised voices carried into the cabin, despite attempts to keep the conversation private. "I cannot believe these people," Claire's voice emerged clearly, in a momentary lull of the aircraft's ambient noise. He probably used points or some diversity program to get up here. Did you see how he was dressed? Acting like he owns the place. Marcus's finger hovered over the messaging icon, considering whether to alert Diane immediately or to let the situation unfold further. The decision was made for him when the galley curtain parted and a third crew member emerged, the purser based on her uniform insignia. "Mr. Reynolds," she began, her tone professionally neutral but with an underlying tension. "I understand there's been some confusion with your meal service. I want to assure you that we take all passenger concerns seriously." "Thank you," Marcus responded, noting her strategic use of his name. Clearly, someone had finally checked the passenger manifest. "As I explained to your colleagues, I pre-ordered a meal that wasn't delivered and instead received food that appears to be spoiled." The purser nodded, her expression carefully composed. "We're investigating the situation. In the meantime, I can offer you a selection from our business class menu if that would be acceptable." "What I find interesting," Marcus replied, ignoring the downgraded offer, "is that your colleague suggested this treatment was intentional with rather specific implications about why I might be receiving it." The purser's professional composure fractured sweetly. "I am certain there has been a misunderstanding. Claire is among our most seasoned flight attendants." "Experience does not negate bias," Marcus observed with quiet deliberation, conscious that nearby travelers were still intently following their exchange. In fact, it often simply provides more fertile ground for such actions. The intercom suddenly crackled to life, and the captain's voice resonated through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Hoffman speaking. Our flight attendants have apprised me of a developing situation within the first-class cabin. I wish to remind all passengers that crew directives must be adhered to without exception for safety imperatives. Any behavior that disrupts order will not be countenanced." The message carried an unmistakable subtext. Marcus was being cast as the antagonist. He surveyed the cabin, noting how a number of passengers were now regarding him with a blend of curiosity and distrust. The narrative was being rapidly reshaped in real time, transforming his reasonable plea for equitable treatment into an act of defiance warranting the captain's intervention. The purser straightened, her posture bolstered by the captain's implicit endorsement. "Mr. Reynolds, I must insist that you accept the present circumstances. We are endeavoring our utmost to accommodate every individual." Marcus met her gaze directly. "What precisely about my conduct has been disruptive? I have not raised my voice. I have made no demands beyond requesting the service for which I have paid. I have refused no safety instructions." "Sir, your persistent questioning of our established procedures is generating an atmosphere of unrest within the cabin," the purser responded, her tone hardening. "I am compelled to request that you let this matter rest." Marcus registered movement in his peripheral vision. Mr. Whitman had once again risen from his seat, approaching with measured steps. "Pardon me," the elder gentleman interjected, addressing the purser directly. "I've been observing this unfolding situation, and frankly, the manner in which you have addressed this gentleman has been deplorable. He has conducted himself with nothing but politeness, despite being served substandard provisions and subjected to condescending remarks." The purser turned her attention to Whitman, her expression immediately softening. "Sir, I appreciate your concern. However, this is a matter for the crew to resolve." "Is it?" Whitman challenged, his voice projecting clearly throughout the cabin. "Because from my vantage point, it appears to be flagrant prejudice. I have been a patron of Elite Airways for over 2 decades, and I have never witnessed such a profound lack of service or disrespect toward a passenger." A low murmur of assent arose from several other passengers. The prevailing sentiment was visibly shifting as individuals began to draw connections between Marcus's treatment and his ethnicity. The purser's expression tightened as she grasped that her control over the unfolding account was diminishing. "We shall promptly provide you with an alternative from the business class selection, Mr. Reynolds," she stated abruptly, turning on her heel to withdraw towards the galley. "That will not be required," Marcus called after her, his voice steady yet clearly audible. "What is required is an explanation as to why I am being treated differently from every other individual in this cabin." The purser paused, visibly unsettled by this direct challenge to her authority. Before she could formulate a reply, the galley curtain parted once more, and Captain Hoffman himself emerged, his features set in stern lines as he surveyed the first-class cabin. His gaze settled upon Marcus with unmistakable animosity. "Sir," the captain began, his voice imbued with the weight of absolute authority aboard the aircraft, "I understand you are causing a disturbance. I must inform you that should this behavior persist, I will be compelled to divert the flight for the safety of all passengers." The threat hung palpably in the air as Marcus calmly reached for his tablet, opening his executive email with deliberate movements. "Captain Hoffman, I would advise you to reconsider such a course of action. I have caused no disturbance, as numerous witnesses in this cabin can attest. What I have done is question why I am being singled out for inferior service and disrespectful treatment." The captain's expression darkened. "Sir, as the commander of this aircraft, my determination of what constitutes a disturbance is final. I am affording you one final opportunity to comply with crew instructions and cease this disruptive conduct." "What specific instruction have I failed to comply with?" Marcus inquired, his finger poised above the send button on an email addressed to the airline's board of directors, an email destined to reach their devices long before the aircraft could reach any diverted destination. The captain did not respond immediately, perhaps recognizing the precariousness of his position. In the ensuing silence, the purser leaned forward to whisper something in his ear. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a hint of apprehension entering his eyes. "This is not about adhering to instructions," Marcus continued, seizing the momentary hesitation. "This is about being treated with fundamental dignity and receiving the service that every passenger in this cabin has rightfully paid for. The only disruption has been instigated by your crew's discriminatory actions." An incipient headache began to throb at Marcus's temples as he maintained eye contact with the captain. Neither man was willing to yield in what had transformed from a straightforward service issue into a critical juncture of principle. Behind them, the cabin had fallen into complete silence. The collective focus of every passenger was fixed upon the confrontation unfolding before them. The captain's imposing presence loomed over Marcus as the standoff persisted. Every passenger in the cabin was now fully invested in the unfolding drama. Time seemed to stretch as Marcus weighed his options, his mind swiftly traversing potential outcomes with the strategic acumen that had guided his business endeavors for decades. He could capitulate, accepting the substandard treatment, swallowing his pride, and preserving the tranquility that everyone around him appeared so desperate to maintain. It was the path of least resistance, one he had traversed in his earlier years when forging his career seemed paramount over challenging the subtle indignities he encountered daily. The memory of those concessions now left a bitter residue in his mouth, far more unpalatable than the spoiled bread he had been served. Alternatively, he could stand firm, not only for himself, but for all who had ever been dismissed, belittled, or dehumanized based on the hue of their skin. The surveillance cameras were recording. The witnesses were observing. The evidence was accumulating. This was no longer merely about a meal. It was about accountability within a system designed to evade it. "Captain Hoffman," Marcus finally spoke, his voice resonating with a quiet strength that commanded attention. "Before you render a decision that will impact everyone on this aircraft, I believe there is something you should be privy to." "I have made my decision," the captain interrupted, his jaw clenched with barely suppressed fury. "This is my aircraft, and I will not tolerate any passenger undermining my crew's authority." Marcus nodded slowly, his finger hovering over the send button on his tablet. "That precisely is the crux of the issue, Captain. You have made a determination based on erroneous information. You have not once sought my perspective on the unfolding events, yet you are prepared to inconvenience hundreds of passengers by diverting this flight." The captain's eyes narrowed menacingly. "Sir, this is your final admonition. Comply with crew instructions immediately, or I shall be compelled to declare an emergency and land at the nearest accessible airport." "And to what instruction would you like me to comply?" Marcus inquired, maintaining his composed demeanor despite the escalating tension. "Thus far, I have been instructed to accept spoiled food, to express gratitude for discriminatory treatment, and to remain silent when subjected to racial prejudice. Which of these directives do you deem reasonable or lawful?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed the captain's face, swiftly masked by renewed resolve. "This is not about ethnicity. This is about maintaining order within my cabin." "It became about ethnicity the moment your flight attendant decided I did not belong in first class," Marcus countered, his gaze unwavering. "It became about ethnicity when I was served spoiled provisions while everyone around me received their proper meals. It became about ethnicity when your crew member made explicit remarks concerning my presence here." Behind the captain, Claire had emerged from the galley, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and apprehension as she realized the situation was spiraling beyond her control. "Captain, perhaps we should—" Mr. Reynolds is correct." Mr. Mort Whitman's voice cut through the palpable tension, drawing all eyes to the silver-haired passenger who had risen to stand beside Marcus. "I witnessed the entire interaction, as did several others in this cabin. Your flight attendant made explicitly prejudiced remarks and deliberately served this gentleman spoiled food. If you divert this flight, you will be doing so solely to penalize a passenger for calmly requesting to be treated with basic human decency." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the cabin as other passengers began to voice their support. A woman across the aisle held up her phone. "I have recorded portions of this interaction. The flight attendant clearly stated he does not belong in first class, despite his platinum status." Captain Hoffman's authority was visibly diminishing as the collective testimony of the cabin united against the narrative he had been presented. His gaze darted between the passengers, the growing chorus of dissent undermining his position with each passing moment. "Captain," Marcus stated, his tone deliberate, "I'm affording you an opportunity to manage this situation professionally. You can either address the prejudiced conduct of your crew, or you can exacerbate the problem by diverting this flight without legitimate cause, a decision that will have ramifications extending far beyond today." The implication hung in the air, unspoken yet clear. The captain's jaw worked silently as he processed his increasingly limited options. Behind him, Claire retreated back behind the galley curtain, the faint sounds of urgent whispering carrying into the cabin. Marcus maintained his steady gaze on the captain, allowing the weight of the moment to settle between them. The confrontation had reached its critical juncture. Retreating now would only embolden the behavior he had witnessed not only on this flight, but throughout the airline he partially owned. The responsibility to act weighed heavily upon his shoulders, a burden he had carried throughout his career as he navigated environments never designed with individuals like him in mind. With deliberate calmness, Marcus pressed send on the email he had composed to the board of directors, an email detailing the discriminatory treatment he had experienced and requesting an immediate review of the aircraft's surveillance footage. The soft chime of confirmation seemed to echo in the tense silence of the cabin. "I have just communicated with the airline's executive team," Marcus declared, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed cabin. "I have requested that they review the surveillance footage from this flight, which I believe will provide conclusive evidence of the treatment I have received. I have also asked them to prepare for the possibility that you might divert this flight without legitimate cause." The captain's expression darkened at this direct challenge to his authority. "Surveillance footage? There are no cameras in this cabin." "Actually, Captain Hoffman, there are," Marcus corrected him, his tone matter-of-fact. "The premium cabin surveillance system was installed 3 months ago across the entire fleet. Every interaction in this cabin for the past hour has been recorded and stored on the airline's secure servers, including the conversations that took place behind that curtain." The color drained from Captain Hoffman's face as the implication registered. Behind the galley curtain, Marcus could hear Claire's voice rising in panic, though her words were indistinct. The captain's hand moved toward his communication device, but he hesitated, suddenly uncertain of his next move. Captain, Marcus continued, seizing the moment of uncertainty, I understand that you are in a difficult position. You have been provided with incomplete information by your crew, and you are attempting to maintain order on your aircraft. But the facts of this situation are not in dispute. They have been witnessed by multiple passengers and recorded by the cabin surveillance system. The question now is how you choose to proceed. The intercom crackled suddenly, and a flight attendant's voice announced from the cockpit, Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer speaking. We are experiencing some technical difficulties with our originally planned route. The captain will be returning to the flight deck momentarily to assess the situation. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened until further notice. The announcement was clearly a pretense, a transparent attempt to salvage the rapidly deteriorating situation. Captain Hoffman's expression had transformed from authoritative confidence to barely concealed concern as he realized the potential repercussions of his actions. Without another word, he turned and strode toward the cockpit, leaving the first-class cabin in a buzz of whispered conversations and speculative glances. The purser approached Marcus cautiously, her demeanor markedly different from minutes earlier. Mr. Reynolds, I wish to apologize for the misunderstanding. We shall have a proper meal brought to you immediately from business class. This is not about the meal anymore, Marcus replied evenly. This is about addressing a pattern of discriminatory behavior that appears to be tolerated within this airline. The purser's professional mask slipped, revealing genuine anxiety beneath. Sir, I assure you that Elite Airways has stringent policies against any form of discrimination. This was an isolated incident. Was it? Marcus interrupted, his voice level but firm. Because according to the airline's own records, there have been 17 formal complaints from minority passengers in first class over the past year alone. 5 specifically mentioning flight attendant Claire Wilson. 3 were dismissed with customer vouchers, but no disciplinary action. That does not sound isolated to me, that sounds systematic. The purser's eyes widened at the specific information, details that only someone with access to the airline's internal HR records would possess. She retreated a step, suddenly uncertain of precisely whom she was addressing. Behind the galley curtain, Marcus could hear Claire's voice rising in distress. How would he know about cameras? Nobody told us there were cameras. What else does he know? The intercom crackled to life once more. Captain Hoffman's voice now strained with forced professionalism. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. After consulting with air traffic control, we have determined that a slight deviation from our flight path is necessary. We will be landing at Denver International Airport in approximately 50 minutes to address a technical concern. We apologize for any inconvenience and expect to resume our journey to San Francisco after a brief stop. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing. Marcus exhaled slowly, recognizing the decision for what it was, an attempt to remove him from the aircraft without explicitly identifying him as the problem. The captain was choosing escalation over accountability, punishment over resolution. As the announcement concluded, Marcus opened his messaging app once more, typing a brief but decisive message to Jessica. Denver landing confirmed. Full intervention required. Contact Diane immediately. I want her team waiting at the gate. Full surveillance review. Captain Hoffman is diverting to remove me from the flight. The response was instantaneous. Already on it. Diane deploying to Denver now. Board has been notified. Stand by for further updates. Around him, passengers began to murmur in frustration at the unexpected delay. A businessman checked his watch with visible annoyance, while a young couple whispered anxiously about connecting flights. The ripple effects of the discrimination Marcus had experienced were now spreading throughout the aircraft, impacting every passenger's journey. A microcosm of how unchecked prejudice inevitably damages the whole, not just its intended target. As the aircraft began its descent toward Denver, Marcus sat back in his seat, his expression calm, despite the storm raging around and within him. The confrontation had escalated beyond anything he had anticipated when he first questioned the substandard meal. But perhaps this was always where such moments were destined to lead, to crossroads where one either acquiesced to injustice or stood firmly against it, regardless of the consequences. Tension builds for First Class Justice. First Class Justice, Block 4. Tension builds. The atmosphere within the cabin grew increasingly fraught as the aircraft commenced its descent toward Denver. Passengers throughout first class whispered amongst themselves, casting sidelong glances at Marcus, while the flight attendants, avoiding all eye contact, moved through their landing preparations with mechanical precision. Marcus remained composed, reviewing the chain of events that had precipitated this unexpected diversion, each moment crystallizing in his memory as evidence for what would undoubtedly become a pivotal moment for Elite Airways. His tablet chimed softly, signaling an incoming message from Jessica. Diane has confirmed the surveillance system is active and recording. Legal team is downloading footage now. HR representatives and airport officials will be awaiting us at Gate B17 in Denver. The CEO has been notified and is monitoring the situation personally. Marcus acknowledged the update with a subtle nod, as if to himself. The machinery of corporate accountability was now in motion. Systems he had helped to implement during his 3 years as a silent partner with the airline. He had always believed that genuine change necessitated both principled ideals and practical mechanisms for their enforcement. Today, those mechanisms would be put to the test. Captain Hoffman's voice crackled over the intercom once more, the strain in his tone barely concealed beneath professional detachment. Cabin crew, prepare for landing. We will be on the ground in approximately 15 minutes. Through the partially open galley curtain, Marcus could observe Claire and Michael huddled in urgent conversation, their faces etched with concern. Claire's gestures grew increasingly agitated as Michael checked his phone, his expression darkening with each passing moment. Marcus could not discern their words over the descent noise of the aircraft, but their body language conveyed a mounting anxiety. A soft chime from his tablet drew Marcus's attention to another message from Jessica. Surveillance audio recovered from GI. Sending transcript now. The attached file opened automatically, revealing a conversation that had taken place behind the curtain shortly after his interaction with the captain. Claire, I cannot fathom this happening. Who does he believe he is? Michael, I advised you we should have simply given him the standard meal. Claire, why? So he can come up here and act as though he owns the place. These people need to understand their designated place. Michael, lower your voice. You are aware we are not permitted to say what we are all thinking. First they infiltrate coach, now they are pushing into first class. The next thing you know, they will be piloting the aircraft. Captain Hoffman, what is the situation here? Claire. Captain, that passenger in 2A is being disruptive. He's making the other passengers uncomfortable. Captain Hoffman, in what manner? Precisely, Claire. He's lodging complaints about the food, making accusations. Several passengers have expressed their disquiet. Michael, he has been rather confrontational. Captain Hoffman, has he threatened anyone? Violated any safety protocols? Claire, not precisely, but his demeanor is disruptive. He's the kind of individual who consistently seeks preferential treatment, frequently resorting to playing the race card. Captain Hoffman, I see. Well, we cannot permit any disturbances in the cabin. I shall address him. Claire, perhaps we should simply reroute the flight, get him off the plane, place him on the no-fly list to prevent future issues for other flight crews. Captain Hoffman, permit me to manage this situation. If he proves uncooperative, that is precisely the course of action we will take. Marcus concluded the transcript, a blend of vindication and exhaustion washing over him. The blatant prejudice evident in the dialogue corroborated what he had already suspected, yet seeing it so explicitly documented still struck him with the force of an unforeseen blow. This was not merely a matter of subpar service or a misunderstanding. It was calculated discrimination orchestrated by multiple members of the flight crew, including the captain himself. Across the aisle, Mr. Whitman inclined slightly towards Marcus. I couldn't help but observe how remarkably composed you appear, given that your flight is being diverted to Denver, he commented softly. It's almost as if you anticipated this. Marcus met the elder gentleman's gaze with a measured smile. Let's just say that in my profession, I've become accustomed to preparing for a variety of eventualities. Whitman offered a thoughtful nod. Investment banking, technology, and strategic consulting, Marcus stated, identifying his field. Reynolds, Technologies. Recognition flickered in Whitman's eyes. "You are Marcus Reynolds," he declared, his voice tinged with realization. "Your firm was instrumental in the digital transformation for half of the Fortune 500 companies, among other significant projects." Marcus acknowledged this with a hint of modesty. Whitman's expression shifted, conveying a mixture of amusement and admiration. "I have a distinct feeling that Captain Hoffman has made a rather significant strategic miscalculation today." Before Marcus could offer a response, the aircraft made a firm touchdown on the Denver runway, its thrust reversers engaging with a roar as they rapidly decelerated. The customary post-landing announcements followed, albeit with a deviation from the standard script. Instead of expressing gratitude to the passengers for choosing Elite Airways, Captain Hoffman curtly instructed everyone to remain seated until further notice, citing security protocols that required adherence. Marcus's phone vibrated, signaling an incoming call. It was a direct line he reserved for his most senior executives and for truly critical situations. Jessica's voice came through clearly as he answered, "Marcus, are you all right?" "I'm fine," he assured her, speaking in a quiet tone, yet without concern for being overheard. "What is the situation on the ground?" "Diane and the team are positioned at the gate. Airport security has been apprised that this is an internal airline matter, not a security breach. They have agreed to stand down and allow our personnel to handle it. The surveillance footage has undergone review by our legal department. It is conclusive, and the board has been fully briefed. The chairman has convened an emergency session for tomorrow morning, but he has already empowered you to take any necessary actions in the interim. His precise words were, 'Clean house if you deem it necessary.'" Marcus nodded to himself, a sense of responsibility settling upon his shoulders. What had commenced as a personal slight had escalated into a pivotal moment that would shape the ethos of an entire organization, one that bore his silent investment and, by extension, his tacit approval of its operational practices. The repercussions extended far beyond this particular flight, this crew, or even this specific airline. It represented a critical juncture in how corporations confront the pervasive reality of discrimination in environments presumed to be impervious to such issues. The aircraft came to a complete halt at the gate, but the usual flurry of passengers disembarking did not commence. Instead, a profound quiet settled over the cabin as individuals awaited further directives, the palpable tension hanging in the recycled air. Captain Hoffman emerged from the cockpit, his uniform immaculate, yet his demeanor strained as he proceeded down the aisle towards Marcus. "Mr. Reynolds," the captain began, his tone meticulously neutral, "I must request that you deplane first. Representatives are awaiting your arrival at the gate to speak with you." Marcus met the captain's gaze with unwavering steadiness. "I am aware of that, Captain Hoffman. However, before I disembark this aircraft, I wish to understand the precise reasons for our diversion. For the official record," the captain's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "As I previously stated, we are addressing a technical concern." "And what technical concern would that be?" Marcus inquired, his voice calm yet unyielding. "One that materialized suddenly after I raised concerns regarding your crew's discriminatory conduct." Captain Hoffman cast a glance around at the attentive passengers, clearly uneasy with this public challenge to his authority. "Sir, this is not the appropriate venue for such a discussion. If you have concerns regarding your treatment, our customer service representatives will be pleased to address them at the gate." "I believe this is precisely the appropriate forum," Marcus countered, gesturing to the surrounding cabin. "These passengers have had their travel plans disrupted. They are entitled to know why. Was there, in fact, a technical issue with this aircraft, Captain Hoffman, or was this diversion an attempt to remove a passenger who had the audacity to question being served moldy sustenance and subjected to racial epithets?" The question hung in the air, direct and absolute. Several passengers leaned forward in their seats, equally keen to hear the captain's response. The moment stretched as Hoffman visibly weighed his options, none of them palatable. "I made the decision based on the information I had at my disposal at that time," he finally stated, his words carefully chosen to reveal nothing while conceding nothing. And what specific information was that? Marcus persisted, undeterred by the evasion. That a first-class passenger calmly requested equitable treatment? Or was it the information conveyed by your flight attendant asserting that I did not belong in this cabin due to the color of my skin? A murmur rippled through the cabin as passengers reacted to the explicit articulation of what many had already perceived. Captain Hoffman's face flushed with embarrassment, his authority crumbling under the weight of his own actions, now exposed to public scrutiny. "This conversation is concluded," he declared abruptly. "Security will escort you from the aircraft." As if summoned, the cabin door opened. However, instead of the airport security personnel Captain Hoffman had clearly anticipated, a woman in a smartly tailored suit entered, flanked by two individuals in Elite Airways executive attire. Marcus recognized Diane Chen instantly, the head of human resources, moving with purpose down the aisle toward them. "Captain Hoffman," she began, her voice professional, yet chilling several degrees as she addressed him. "There will be no need for security. Mr. Reynolds is not being removed from this flight." Confusion contorted the captain's face. "Ma'am, I have made the determination that your determination has been superseded," Diane interrupted crisply, turning to acknowledge Marcus with a respectful nod. "Mr. Reynolds, on behalf of Elite Airways, I extend our most sincere apologies for your experience today. The conduct exhibited by certain crew members is entirely unacceptable and stands in direct opposition to our fundamental values." The captain's expression cycled rapidly through disbelief, anger, and dawning comprehension as he processed the implications of Diane's presence and her differential treatment of the passenger he had sought to remove. "Miss Chen, with all due respect, I am the commander of this aircraft, and not anymore, Captain," one of the executive officers interjected, his tone leaving no room for debate. "You and your crew are being relieved of duty pending a comprehensive investigation. A replacement crew is already boarding via the rear entrance. They will complete this flight to San Francisco once this matter is resolved." The captain's face paled as the full gravity of the situation finally registered. His gaze shifted to Marcus, reassessing the passenger he had so readily dismissed, struggling to reconcile his presence with the corporate response now unfolding. "Who exactly are you?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Marcus met his gaze evenly. Years of navigating subtle and overt discrimination had prepared him for this moment of reckoning. "Someone who believed your airline could perform better," he replied simply. "Someone who still does." The first-class cabin had fallen into complete silence. Passengers remained frozen in their seats, witnessing the dramatic turn of events unfold before them. Captain Hoffman stood rigid, his authority dismantled in full view of the entire cabin, while Claire and Michael hovered uncertainly at the edge of the galley, their expressions shifting between defiance and dismay as Diane Chen continued to address the situation with clinical efficiency. "Milson, Mr. Barton," Diane called to the flight attendants, her tone firm yet controlled. "Please gather your personal effects and prepare to disembark immediately. Your credentials have been temporarily suspended pending a thorough investigation into today's occurrences." Claire stepped forward, indignation overriding her shock. "This is absurd. We have done nothing wrong. That passenger was being difficult and making unreasonable demands. The captain made the decision to divert for everyone's safety." Diane's expression remained impassive as she raised her tablet, displaying what was clearly surveillance footage from the cabin. "Miss Wilson, we possess comprehensive audio and video documentation of every interaction that transpired on this flight, including your private conversations behind the galley curtain. I strongly advise you to comply with this directive without further incident, which would only exacerbate your current predicament." The color drained from Claire's face as comprehension dawned. Her gaze darted to Marcus, then to the ceiling panels where the discreet cameras were concealed, their presence suddenly unmistakable now that she knew to look for them. "You cannot. This constitutes an invasion of privacy. We were not informed about surveillance. Page 17 of your employment contract and page 4 of the flight attendant handbook explicitly state that all premium cabins are subject to monitoring for quality control and security purposes," Diane replied without hesitation. This policy was instituted 3 months ago, and all crew members were notified through multiple channels, including the mandatory training sessions you acknowledge completing. Marcus observed the exchange with an outward calm that masked the complex emotions churning beneath the surface. There was no satisfaction in witnessing these individuals face repercussions, only a weary acknowledgement that accountability was an indispensable element of progress. The surveillance system he had advocated for had been primarily developed to enhance security and elevate service quality. Its role in documenting discrimination had been a contingency he had hoped would never be necessitated. Captain Hoffman turned to Marcus, his professional demeanor fracturing under the strain of public humiliation. "You orchestrated this, didn't you? You boarded my aircraft specifically looking for trouble, provoking my crew into making an error." "Captain Hoffman," Marcus replied evenly, "I boarded this flight with the same expectation as every other passenger, to receive the service for which I had paid and to be treated with basic dignity. The only plan I had was for a business trip to San Francisco. Everything that followed is a consequence of the choices made by you and your crew." The captain's jaw worked silently, searching for a retort that would not further incriminate him. Finding none, he turned abruptly and strode toward the exit. His rigid posture was a last-ditch effort to preserve what little dignity remained. Claire and Michael followed reluctantly, casting venomous glares at Marcus as they passed. As the disgraced crew members disappeared through the jetway, a collective sigh seemed to pass through the cabin. The tension that had accumulated over the past hour began to dissipate, replaced by a hum of whispered conversations as passengers processed what they had witnessed. Several reached for their phones, undoubtedly composing social media posts that would disseminate the story far beyond the confines of this aircraft. Diane approached Marcus, lowering her voice to maintain a semblance of privacy in the crowded cabin. "Mr. Reynolds, I cannot adequately express how profoundly sorry we are for what transpired today. This represents a complete failure on numerous fronts, and I assure you it will be addressed comprehensively." Marcus nodded, appreciating her professionalism, while recognizing that this moment demanded more than standard corporate damage control. "Thank you, Diane. I understand this is not reflective of the company's values, at least not the values we aspire to, but it is evident that systemic issues require our attention." "Absolutely," she agreed, her expression grave. "The replacement crew will be aboard momentarily, and they will complete the flight to San Francisco. In the interim, is there anything we can do to rectify this situation for you?" Marcus contemplated the question, glancing around at the passengers who were still observing the exchange with rapt attention. Some appeared sympathetic, others uncomfortable, and a few seemed openly resentful of the delay. In that moment, Marcus made a decision that transcended his personal experience, one that acknowledged the collective impact of discrimination, even when directed at an individual. "Yes, there is," he replied, his voice quiet but resolute. "But I would like to address all the passengers once the new crew is settled. This disruption has affected everyone on this flight, and they deserve an explanation." Diane nodded, comprehending the implications of his request. "Of course, the replacement captain and crew should arrive within 10 minutes. I will arrange for you to utilize the intercom system." As Diane stepped away to coordinate with the ground staff, Marcus's phone vibrated with another message from Jessica. "The board chairman wishes to speak with you urgently. Media outlets are already picking up chatter about an Elite Airways flight diversion involving discrimination. How do you wish to handle this?" Marcus typed a swift response. "Inform the chairman I will call once we are airborne again. As for the media, no comment until I have addressed the passengers and we have gathered all the facts. Have legal prepare a statement emphasizing our commitment to addressing the incident transparently and comprehensively. This is not merely about damage control, it presents an opportunity for genuine transformation." He had barely sent the message when another notification appeared. A news alert mentioning Elite Airways and an unscheduled landing following allegations of discriminatory treatment. The digital age dictated that even events unfolding at 30,000 feet could not remain isolated for long. By the time they reached San Francisco, this incident would likely be dominating headlines across the country. Mr. Whitman leaned across the aisle once more, his expression thoughtful. "Quite a turn of events," he remarked quietly. "I have been flying with this airline for 20 years and never imagined I would witness something like this. Part owner, I presume?" Marcus smiled slightly, appreciating the older gentleman's perceptiveness. "Silent partner. I prefer to experience the airline as a regular passenger. It offers insights that cannot be obtained from quarterly reports and customer satisfaction surveys." Wittmann nodded appreciatively. "A shrewd approach, though I imagine today's insights were not what you had anticipated." "No," Marcus agreed, his expression sobering, "but perhaps they were necessary. Some problems remain invisible until they are experienced firsthand." Their conversation was interrupted as the cabin door reopened and the replacement crew boarded the aircraft. The new captain, a woman in her mid-50s with silver-streaked hair and an air of seasoned professionalism, proceeded directly to the intercom system. Her voice filled the cabin moments later, clear and authoritative, without the defensive edge that had characterized Captain Hoffman's communications. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Sarah Lindstrom. I understand today's flight has encountered some unforeseen challenges. My crew and I will be taking over from this point forward, and we anticipate having you en route to San Francisco within 20 minutes. We appreciate your patience and understanding during this transition." The announcement was met with scattered applause from passengers, relieved that their journey would soon resume. Captain Lindstrom made her way through the first-class cabin, pausing briefly at Marcus's seat to introduce herself properly. "Mr. Reynolds," she stated, her handshake firm and direct. "I want to personally assure you that my crew and I are committed to providing excellent service to all our passengers without exception. I understand you will be addressing the cabin before we depart." Marcus nodded, appreciating her straightforward demeanor. "Yes, with your permission. I believe the passengers deserve to understand why their travel plans were interrupted today." "I completely agree," she responded. "Just let me know when you're ready." As Captain Lindstrom proceeded to the cockpit, Diane returned to Marcus's side with a clipboard containing several documents. "These are the preliminary incident reports based on the surveillance footage and witness statements we have already compiled," she explained. "We will conduct more thorough interviews once we reach San Francisco, but I wanted you to review the initial documentation." Marcus examined the reports carefully, noting the clinical precision with which they detailed the discriminatory comments and actions. The evidence was overwhelming and unambiguous, stripped of the emotional context that had made the experience so dehumanizing. On paper, reduced to timestamps and transcribed dialogue, the incident seemed almost mundane, a routine case of prejudice documented with corporate efficiency. But Marcus knew better. He had felt the weight of those dismissive glances, experienced the humiliation of being served spoiled food while others dined on gourmet meals, endured the accusations of disruption when he had merely requested to be treated with basic dignity. These were the realities that reports could never fully capture, the lived experiences that policies alone could never address. As the replacement crew completed their preparations and passengers settled back into their seats, Marcus stood and made his way to the front of the cabin where Diane waited with the intercom handset. The moment had arrived to transform an individual injustice into a catalyst for collective change, to address not just what had transpired on this flight, but what occurred every day in boardrooms, restaurants, shops, and public spaces across the nation. He accepted the handset from Diane, taking a deep breath as he prepared to address the passengers whose journeys had become unexpectedly intertwined with his own. The cabin fell silent in anticipation, all eyes fixed on the man whose quiet dignity in the face of discrimination had brought them to this unprecedented juncture. Here's Block 6, The Landing and Revelation. For first-class justice, first-class justice. Block 6, The Landing and Revelation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the cabin intercom. "My name is Marcus Reynolds. I want to take a moment to address what happened today and why your journey was interrupted." The cabin remained absolutely silent as passengers from both sections listened attentively, united by curiosity about the drama that had unfolded and resulted in an unscheduled landing. Some of you witnessed the interactions in first class that led to this diversion. What began as a simple request for the meal I had pre-ordered escalated into something far more serious when I was deliberately served spoiled food and subjected to discriminatory treatment based on my race. Marcus paused, observing the varied expressions within the passenger cabin. Nods of affirmation came from those who had personally experienced the events, while those in the economy section, hearing the details for the first time, showed clear signs of astonishment. When I inquired about my treatment, the flight attendants characterized me as disruptive and aggressive, leading Captain Hoffman to divert the flight to Denver. This wasn't due to any actual safety risk, but rather a maneuver to remove me from the aircraft. A wave of murmurs swept through the cabin as passengers absorbed this revelation. Marcus continued, his demeanor calm and dignified. What the crew was unaware of was my status as not just a passenger, but also a significant shareholder in Elite Airways. 3 years prior, I had made a substantial investment driven by a vision of an airline that genuinely valued every customer, irrespective of their background or appearance. As a testament to this commitment, I had instituted a cabin monitoring system in all premium sections designed to evaluate service standards and ensure the highest quality for all passengers. This disclosure had a palpable effect. Passengers exchanged glances of surprise and dawning comprehension. In economy, several individuals stood to better hear his words, while the flight attendants remained motionless, processing the implications. That monitoring system had recorded everything that transpired today: the initial discriminatory service, the explicit remarks made out of earshot of most, and the captain's decision to order an emergency landing based on fabricated information. The recorded evidence had already been reviewed by our human resources and legal departments, resulting in the immediate dismissal of the involved crew members. Marcus shifted his focus, his expression softening as he addressed the collective impact. I recognize that this diversion has caused considerable inconvenience to all of you. Your time is precious, and this delay has undoubtedly disrupted your arrangements. For this, I sincerely apologize. He took a breath, aware that his next words would fundamentally alter the atmosphere on the aircraft. To compensate for this inconvenience and to demonstrate our dedication to rectifying this situation, Elite Airways will be issuing a complete refund for each passenger's ticket on this flight, along with $10,000 in compensation and 5 years of complimentary Elite status upgrades. A hushed silence enveloped the cabin, quickly replaced by exclamations of disbelief and then scattered applause that swelled into a sustained ovation. Passengers in economy, who moments before had been anxiously checking their connecting flight schedules, now stared forward in stunned amazement. The generous compensation far exceeded any expectation for a mere flight delay. This recompense is not solely about today's disruption, Marcus continued as the applause subsided. It signifies our acknowledgement that prejudice impacts everyone, even those who are not its direct targets. When we permit injustice to go unchallenged in our presence, we inadvertently contribute to an environment that sustains it. He returned the intercom microphone to Diane, who stepped forward to provide the logistical details for processing the compensation. As she spoke, Marcus returned to his seat, suddenly cognizant of the emotional exhaustion stemming from the confrontation. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the heated exchanges began to wane, leaving behind a familiar weariness, the inherent cost of defending a position that should never have been contested in the first place. Passengers from both sections of the cabin began to approach his seat, forming a line that extended down the aisle. Some merely wished to offer a handshake, others to share their own experiences with discrimination, and many to express their admiration for his handling of the situation. A young African-American woman from economy leaned in to whisper, "Thank you for not letting it slide. Most of us can't afford to fight back like that." Her words resonated deeply, underscoring the privilege that had enabled him to challenge his mistreatment where others might have been compelled to endure it silently. His standing and financial resources had afforded him a leverage that many lacked, a reality that reinforced his obligation to utilize that advantage for systemic change rather than personal vindication. As the last passengers returned to their seats and the aircraft prepared for departure, Mr. Whitman settled back beside Marcus, his expression contemplative. "That was quite a statement you made, both in your words and your actions. Marcus nodded, glancing out the window as the Denver scenery began to recede below. It felt appropriate. Some lessons need to be costly to be truly remembered. $10,000 per passenger is more than costly, Wittmann observed. That's a corporate declaration, if I ever heard one. The financial aspect isn't the primary concern, Marcus replied quietly. What matters is that every individual on this aircraft now has a vested interest in this narrative, not merely as observers, but as active participants. They will recall this flight not for the discrimination they witnessed, but for the accountability that followed. Wittmann considered this, nodding slowly. You're pursuing a more extensive objective than simply addressing a single incident. I must, Marcus stated, watching the clouds envelop the aircraft as they ascended towards cruising altitude, because this was never solely about one flight, one crew, or one particular airline. It's about challenging the underlying assumption that certain spaces are not intended for individuals who resemble me and confronting the casual cruelty that upholds those limitations. As the aircraft leveled off and cabin service resumed, now delivered with impeccable professionalism by the newly assigned crew, Marcus opened his tablet to begin drafting the presentation he intended to deliver to the board the following morning. The surveillance footage offered incontrovertible proof of individual misconduct. However, his current task was to highlight the broader patterns that had allowed such behavior to flourish unchecked. His phone vibrated with an incoming call from the board chairman, Robert Chen. Marcus answered, prepared for the challenging conversation ahead. Marcus, Chen began without preamble, I've just reviewed the preliminary reports and the visual evidence. It's disturbing, to say the least. That's an understatement, Marcus replied, keeping his voice low despite the ambient cabin noise. The financial implications of your compensation offer will be significant. The board will have questions. Marcus had anticipated this concern. The financial cost of perpetuating this culture would be considerably higher in the long run. Lost clientele, legal battles, damage to our reputation. Consider this an investment in the company's future, not an expenditure. There was a brief pause on the line as Chen processed this viewpoint. You've never been one to make hasty decisions, so I trust your judgment in this matter. But what happens next? This incident will be front-page news by morning. That's precisely why our response needs to be equally newsworthy, Marcus explained. I am preparing a comprehensive proposal for systemic reforms across the airline, encompassing new training protocols, accountability frameworks, and revised hiring practices. I will present it to the board tomorrow morning. Some members will resist, Chen cautioned. They'll argue that this was an isolated event, not a widespread issue. Then I will present the data, Marcus countered firmly. 17 formal complaints from minority passengers in first class over the past year alone, most of them dismissed without adequate investigation. That's not isolated. That's a pattern. Chen sighed, the sound betraying his recognition of the magnitude of the challenge ahead. You have my full support, Marcus. This is not only the morally correct action, but also the soundest business decision. I will see you at the emergency board meeting tomorrow. As Marcus concluded the call, he noticed several passengers nearby openly checking their banking applications. Exclamations of surprise confirmed that the promised compensation was already being processed. Diane had acted swiftly, ensuring the corporate response mirrored the urgency of the situation. It was a promising commencement, yet merely the initial step in a considerably longer undertaking. The remainder of the flight proceeded without any further incident, the replacement crew exemplifying the standard of service that Marcus had always envisioned for elite airways, professional, attentive, and crucially, consistent for every passenger, irrespective of their appearance. As they began their descent towards San Francisco, Marcus finalized his notes for the board presentation, understanding that the following day would represent a pivotal moment, not only for his role within the company, but for the very future of the organization. Here is a more concise version of Section 7, incorporating more dialogue for the concept of first-class justice. First-class justice, Section 7, the aftermath commences. The Elite Airways response team was awaiting Marcus as he disembarked in San Francisco, their expressions reflecting the gravity of the situation. James Peterson, the chief operating officer, stepped forward immediately. Marcus, I've reviewed the footage. It's inexcusable, James stated, extending his hand. Yes, it is, Marcus replied firmly. And now we must ensure it never happens again. The chairman has convened an emergency board meeting for tomorrow at 8. This story is already making headlines across every platform. Within the executive terminal, analysts had established a command center displaying data sourced from customer feedback systems. A young data scientist pointed to a screen showcasing customer satisfaction metrics. We've identified a clear statistical disparity in satisfaction scores between Caucasian passengers and passengers of color in premium cabins, she explained, highlighting several graphs, particularly those related to routes staffed by specific crew rotations. And how many of these discrepancies triggered investigations? Marcus inquired. Diane stepped forward. Very few. Our systems classified complaints as isolated incidents unless multiple reports targeted the same employee within a narrow time frame. Or perhaps, Marcus suggested pointedly, it was intentionally designed to prevent the identification of such patterns. James winced. The surveillance system you implemented has revealed discrepancies we simply couldn't see before. Couldn't or wouldn't, Marcus challenged. Systems reflect priorities, James. And our priority now must be accountability, not damage control. Which is why I've already initiated a comprehensive audit of all discrimination complaints received over the past 5 years, Diane interjected, including those that were dismissed upon initial review. A notification appeared on the main screen displaying statements from Claire and Captain Hoffman claiming misunderstanding and suggesting Marcus had exploited his position for retaliation. The lead counsel approached, tablet in hand. The compensation package is generating significant attention, $10 million in total. The board will have questions. They can question the cost of addressing this incident, Marcus replied, or they can consider the considerably higher cost of ignoring it. Marcus stepped aside to contact Jessica in New York. The footage has been completely backed up, correct? He asked. Triple secured, Jessica confirmed. Copies are with our servers, the legal team, and your private cloud. It cannot disappear. Good, because tomorrow is when the real work begins. Today was about addressing an incident. Tomorrow is about changing a system. Robert Chen's message appeared on Marcus's phone. Media requests are pouring in. They want statements, interviews. How do you wish to proceed? No interviews yet, Marcus replied after consideration. Issue a statement acknowledging the incident, confirming immediate action was taken, and announcing comprehensive reforms to be presented tomorrow. Keep the focus on systemic change, not personal drama. A middle-aged African-American executive approached Marcus, lowering her voice. I've been with this airline for 20 years. What happened to you has happened to countless others who couldn't fight back. Thank you for using your position to force this conversation. This isn't just my fight, Marcus responded, meeting her gaze. And the changes we implement can't just be about protecting executives in first class? She nodded. The board will not make this easy. Some will attempt to minimize it, to contain the damage, rather than address the root cause. Then, we will need to make the evidence impossible to ignore, Marcus stated. Tomorrow is not solely about one flight or one crew. It's about acknowledging a reality that has been hidden in plain sight for far too long. As the response team continued their preparations, Marcus surveyed the command center, its screens displaying social media reactions, news coverage, and internal data. The incident had necessitated a long overdue reckoning, but the fact that such dramatic circumstances were required to prompt action was itself an indictment of how deeply entrenched the problems were. James, Marcus called across the room, I want to see complete service records for every crew member who received discrimination complaints over the past 5 years, and I want to know precisely how those complaints were handled, who reviewed them, and what actions were taken. That's hundreds of files, James protested. Then we had better get started, Marcus replied, without hesitation, because tomorrow the board receives every single one. The Elite Airways boardroom fell silent as Marcus concluded his presentation. The evidence of systemic discrimination was laid bare before the assembled executives. The surveillance footage from the flight played one final time on the main screen, showcasing Claire's contemptuous expression, Captain Hoffman's baseless accusations, and the explicit racial comments captured behind the galley curtain. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus stated, his voice steady as he surveyed the board members' reactions. What we witnessed was not an isolated incident, but a manifestation of deeper cultural issues within our organization. The audit has identified 78 similar complaints that were dismissed without proper investigation over the past 3 years. Charles Whitfield, a senior board member with 30 years in the industry, leaned forward with a skeptical expression. While I agree the behavior was inexcusable, isn't the $10 million compensation package excessive? We're discussing poor service, not physical harm. It wasn't merely poor service, Marcus countered firmly. It was deliberate discrimination that culminated in an unnecessary flight diversion impacting every passenger. The compensation acknowledges both the inconvenience and our commitment to meaningful change, along with this comprehensive reform package you're proposing. Victoria Hayes, another board member, gestured toward the thick binders distributed before the meeting. The implementation costs alone would run into millions. Consider the alternative, Marcus replied. Class action lawsuits, government investigations, sustained reputational damage. Our passengers have smartphones, Victoria. The next incident won't just reach our boardroom, it will go viral globally within hours. Robert Chen nodded in agreement. Marcus is right. We have a choice between leading this change proactively or being forced into it reactively under far less favorable circumstances. The debate continued for nearly 3 hours, with some board members resistant to acknowledging the systemic nature of the problem, while others pushed for even more aggressive reforms. Throughout the discussion, Marcus remained resolute, consistently returning to the evidence rather than allowing the conversation to drift into hypotheticals or defensive posturing. This isn't about assigning blame, he emphasized as the discussion neared its conclusion. It's about embedding accountability into our system so that every passenger receives the service and respect they deserve, regardless of their appearance or origin. In the end, the vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive, 11-3, in favor of adopting the comprehensive reform package. The dissenting members registered their concerns about costs and implementation challenges, while ultimately acknowledging that the status quo had become untenable. We will issue a public statement this afternoon, Robert announced as the meeting adjourned. Full transparency regarding what transpired, the actions we have taken in response, and our commitment to systemic reform moving forward. As the boardroom emptied, Diane approached Marcus with the initial implementation timeline already drafted on her tablet. We can commence the enhanced training program next week. The expansion of the surveillance system will take longer, approximately 3 months for the entire fleet. Good, Marcus nodded. And the review committee for discrimination complaints? I have already identified potential members, diverse in terms of both demographics and positions within the company. We will require your final approval, of course. Marcus smiled slightly, appreciating her initiative. Share the list with me tonight. I want individuals who understand what is at stake here, not just for the company, but for every passenger who places their trust in us for their journey. The Elite Airways first-class cabin gleamed in the morning sunlight as Marcus settled into seat 2A, the same position he had occupied during that pivotal flight 6 months prior. The transformation was not solely in the recently updated interior, but in the subtle yet significant shifts in service culture that had taken root throughout the airline. Sarah Johnson, now the permanent lead flight attendant for the premium New York to San Francisco route, approached with a warm smile that held no trace of the artificial difference that often characterized first-class service. Good morning, Mr. Reynolds. Your pre-ordered Macallan 18-year-old and special meal have been noted. May I get you anything else before takeoff? Just the usual hot towel. Thank you, Marcus replied, returning her smile as he observed her interactions with other passengers, noting the consistent professionalism and genuine warmth she extended to each person, irrespective of their appearance or background. As Sarah moved through the cabin, she placed an envelope on Marcus's tray table. From the crew, she explained before continuing her preparations. Inside, Marcus found a handwritten note signed by every member of the flight staff. Mr. Reynolds, your courage 6 months ago transformed not only our airline but our industry. What began as a painful confrontation has become a model for change that airlines across the country are now emulating. We are proud to serve on an aircraft where every passenger truly receives first-class treatment. Thank you for setting the standard. The crew of Flight 347. Marcus tucked the note into his jacket pocket, his mind briefly turning to the aftermath that had followed for the original flight crew. Claire Wilson, Michael Barton, and Captain Hoffman had not conceded quietly. As anticipated, they had attempted to contest their dismissals through their union representatives, asserting they were being scapegoated for what they persistently characterized as a misunderstanding. Their efforts ultimately collapsed when the complete surveillance footage was presented during the arbitration hearings. The explicit racial remarks captured behind the galley curtain, coupled with the evidence of deliberately serving spoiled food, left no room for plausible denial. All three were permanently dismissed from Elite Airways, with the incident documented in their employment records. But the consequences had not ended there. The Federal Aviation Administration had initiated its own investigation into Captain Hoffman's decision to divert the aircraft without legitimate safety concerns, ultimately suspending his commercial pilot's license for 6 months. More significantly, the incident had been incorporated into airline training programs nationwide as a case study illustrating how bias could compromise flight safety and operational decisions. Claire Wilson had tried to present herself in interviews as a casualty of public condemnation, but found little public empathy, even from media generally inclined to be supportive once the video evidence surfaced. The last Marcus heard, she was employed by a smaller, regional airline assigned to less desirable short-haul economy routes and under closer scrutiny. The most significant consequence, however, wasn't the disciplinary actions taken, but the substantial improvements they had prompted. The extensive training program, first established by Elite Airways, had subsequently been adopted by 3 additional major airlines. The diverse panel assembled to examine discrimination claims had proven so effective that its purview had been broadened to encompass other passenger service matters. Furthermore, the surveillance system now installed in both first-class and economy cabins served a dual purpose, as a deterrent and as a record, ensuring that future transgressions could not be easily dismissed as simple misunderstandings. As the aircraft commenced its journey to the runway, Marcus opened his tablet to peruse the quarterly performance statistics. Elite Airways bookings for premium seats had seen an upswing, contradicting forecasts by industry analysts who had predicted brand damage following the widely publicized event. The openness with which the company had addressed the discrimination and pledged to implement reforms had resonated with travelers weary of corporate apologies that lacked tangible action. The voice of Captain Lisa Hernandez then came over the loudspeaker, extending a welcome to the passengers on Flight 347 bound for San Francisco. 6 months prior, Marcus had boarded an airplane where he was perceived as an unwelcome presence in an environment not intended for individuals who resembled him. Today, he was flying on an airline that had undergone a transformation. It was not yet perfect, but it was actively endeavoring to cultivate an atmosphere where every traveler, irrespective of their appearance, was treated with dignity and consideration. The folded note from the crew felt warm in his pocket as the aircraft accelerated down the tarmac. The incident had never truly been about a specific meal, a change in flight plan, or even the personal bias of a particular crew member. It had been about a fundamental yet powerful principle that spaces designed for everyone must genuinely welcome everyone. It was also about the realization that genuine change necessitated not only addressing individual occurrences, but also overhauling the very systems that permitted them. As the plane ascended into the clouds, Marcus briefly closed his eyes, allowing himself to experience a sensation that had been absent from far too many of his prior journeys. It was the simple joy of being treated not as an anomaly or an interloper, but simply as a passenger. He was welcomed aboard without any preconditions or reservations. I trust you found enjoyment in this narrative. Kindly disseminate it among your acquaintances and consider subscribing to ensure you don't miss future installments. In the interim, I have personally selected 2 additional stories that I believe will captivate your interest. I wish you a most excellent day.